Hi, friends. It's Lisa Hetrick. I'm so grateful you are with me today. I am blessed to be part of the illustration team at Gina K Designs, and I'm popping in here today to share my new stamp set called You Are. Many of you know that watercolor is my jam, and I'm a bit of an art supply and technique junkie. So I thought I'd share how I use Gina K Designs dye inks as a watercolor medium for paper crafting, and also thought I would share the new stamp set along the way. So come along and join me. So to get started, I pulled some of my pure luxury cardstock from Gina K Designs, trimmed it down to about a 4x4 because I'm going to stamp the wreath from the UR set, and I pulled my water brush and some of my favorite Gina K Designs dye inks. Sped up the video a little bit, but I'm taking the dye inks and I am smashing them down onto my surface so that I can use the ink as a watercolor medium. Then I'm going to take the Gina K Designs Innocence Pink dye ink and ink up the wreath and stamp it down onto the 4x4 piece of cardstock. I'm going to use that image and color it in, so stamping it down anywhere on the cardstock will work. So here's where the fun begins. Using the water brush, I just go around the wreath and start dipping my pen, my water brush pen, into the dye ink and using it as a watercolor. And the beautiful thing about the Gina K Designs dye inks is that they are very, very vibrant. So you can use them as a watercolor medium like this very, very easily. Now, the pure luxury paper is luscious and beautiful, but it's not a watercolor paper. So you want to be very cautious about how much water you use. So that's why I'm using a water brush, because I can really control the distribution of water and how much I'm going to put into the dye ink to kind of get it going to use it as a paint. So I just keep working my way around the wreath and applying color using the purples and the pinks and a little bit of the greens just to kind of fill it in and give it that watercolor look. Now that I have the base color of watercolor on the wreath, I'm going to go ahead and use some of the bits from the UR stamp set and go ahead and stamp them right onto the wreath, but I'm going to use the ink that I have down on the craft mat that's already kind of been watered down and just stamp it around the edges of the wreath to create a little bit more added dimension and texture, and it creates a watercolor effect because I'm not using the ink right from the cube. I'm actually applying the stamp right into the ink that's on the craft mat. Now there's lots of different ways that you could do this, and you could really water down the dye ink and make it really watery, or you could just use it a little bit more on the drier side to get that effect. So I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit more stamping around the wreath, but I'm going to water down my dye inks a little bit more. They were getting a little bit dry, and I want to use the leaf portions from the set and use a different color. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of put it down on the paper and apply some of the pink, but first I want to test it because it is kind of watery. So you can see that it's going to stamp a little bit unrecognizable. So it's kind of important to get a good mix of water and ink to kind of make this effect happen. So you can see now it's just a little bit drier, but it will still stamp and have that really beautiful watercolor effect. So I've sped up the video a little bit so that I can show you how using the pieces from the UR stamp set and adding a little bit more water and a little bit more ink and also dipping the stamp in multiple colors, I'm able to create a couple different color effects with the dye inks. One of the other results of using this technique is that sometimes you're going to get a little bit of ink in places you really didn't want it to be. It could come from your stamp, it could come from your block, but I really think that those are kind of like happy mistakes. So here I'm taking a paintbrush and I'm dipping it in the dye inks and getting everything a little bit wet, and then going ahead and tapping it down onto the design so that we can get a little bit of ink splatter and also get a little bit more of that color. So now I'm going to go ahead and stamp the sentiment inside the wreath. And one of the interesting things about the set when I was designing it and illustrating it is that I wanted a wreath that could be turned in any direction and you would get a completely different look. So you would be able to turn that wreath in any direction, either 360 degrees or 90 degrees, and get a different effect. But the sentiments fit perfectly within the center of the space, no matter how you turn it. So I'm going to go ahead and ink up the U from the set, and using the ink that I have on my craft mat, it's a little bit on the dry side. It's got a little bit of water in it, but it's a little on the dry side because I want it to stamp a little bit more dry. And when it does and comes out, it's going to have a watercolor effect to it that's drier and not as watery. So now I'm going to go ahead and pick a sentiment from the set to stamp with the U. And I've chosen "Are a Joy." And the beautiful thing about this sentiment is that it fits, the J fits right around the Y, and the R in the ARE fits between the O and the U. And that was intentional so that you could really bring those two stamps really close together. So for this sentiment, I thought it would be really fun to water down the inks a bit more. So you can see that I'm loading it up a little bit more so that I can put a little more water on it and mist it down and get it pretty wet. So I'm going to go ahead and mist it and then put my sentiment, "Are a Joy," in the ink, but I want to put it between the two inks. So I'm going to give it a quick test. So as you can see, it's a little bit watery. So even when you stamp off, it becomes a little bit unrecognizable. So I've gone ahead and put a little bit more ink in there so that it'll dry it up a little bit and I can get a little bit more ink. So when I stamp it, it is very, very watercolory, and I lost a little bit of the detail in the Y, but that's okay because you could dip right back in the ink and add it right back in to get that watercolor effect. I hope that you enjoyed today's video and maybe learned a little bit something new about watercolor effects with dye inks. And I hope you'll give it a go on your next stamp and paper crafting project. So here's what the final card looked like, and I'm really grateful you stopped by. Thanks so much for watching.